3 weeks ago, I watched my daughter get slapped across the face at her own wedding. 20 million people watched it happen. But here's what they don't know: I wasn't even invited. Sarah told me to stay home, said I'd embarrass her in front of Boston high society. So I sat alone in my Texas living room watching the livestream like a stranger. When Brandon Hartford's hand connected with her face in front of 200 guests, I knew the truth. My daughter hadn't uninvited me to her wedding. Her husband had. What happened next changed everything. The video went viral. Brandon took Sarah hostage. And I discovered something that made my blood run cold. My own husband didn't die of a heart attack 3 years ago. Brandon murdered him. By the time this story ends, I'll have exposed a network of wealthy men who abuse women for sport, taken down one of Boston's most powerful families, and proven that a small-town piano teacher can beat them all. But first, I had to save my daughter's life. And trust me, you won't believe how I did it. My name is Barbara Mitchell. I'm 58 years old, a retired piano teacher, living in a small Texas town where everyone knows everyone. And 3 years ago, I became a widow when my husband Thomas died suddenly of a heart attack. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known, was that his death was just the beginning of a nightmare that would nearly destroy my daughter. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The day everything started to unravel began like any other Tuesday afternoon. I was in my living room teaching 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez how to play Für Elise when the phone rang. Sarah's name lit up the screen, and my heart did that little leap it always does when my daughter calls. We hadn't spoken in nearly 2 weeks, which had become normal since she'd moved to Boston for work 2 years ago. Normal, but not right. "Mom." Her voice sounded strange, tight, rehearsed. "Sweetheart, I was just thinking about you. How are you?" "I'm good, really good, actually. I have news." A pause. "Brandon and I are getting married." I should have felt pure joy. Instead, something cold settled in my stomach. Maybe it was the way she said his name, Brandon, with a kind of careful reverence, like she was talking about someone who might be listening. Maybe it was the fact that she'd been dating this man for 2 years, and I'd never met him, never even spoken to him on the phone. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful." I forced enthusiasm into my voice. "Tell me everything. When did he propose? Have you set a date?" 3 months from now, Boston. It's going to be at the Fairmont Hotel. 3 months. My daughter was getting married in 3 months, and I was just now finding out. "That's soon," I said carefully. "But how exciting. I can't wait to meet Brandon. You'll have to bring him down here, or maybe I could fly up." "Brandon says we should keep it small and elegant." There it was again. Brandon says. His family has very specific expectations about these things. You know how it is with old Boston families. I didn't know, actually. I'd grown up in this Texas town, married young, divorced at 28, and spent the next 30 years teaching children to play piano. The fanciest event I'd attended was the county fair. "Well, I'm sure we can figure something out," I said. "I want to be part of this, Sarah. I want to help plan, maybe go dress shopping with you. Brandon thinks it's better if his mother helps with that. She knows the Boston boutiques." Brandon thinks. Brandon says. Every sentence was filtered through him, and I realized with growing horror that I couldn't remember the last time Sarah had expressed an opinion that wasn't prefaced by what Brandon thought about it. "Sarah, are you happy?" The question came out before I could stop it. "Of course I'm happy." Her voice went from tight to brittle. "Why would you ask that?" "I just want to make sure. I have to go, Mom. I'll send you the invitation soon, okay?" And she was gone. I sat there holding the phone, staring at the photos on my piano. Sarah at 5, gap-toothed and grinning. Sarah at 10, serious and focused over the keys. Sarah at 18, radiant in her high school graduation gown. When had I lost her? The sound of the front door slamming made me jump, my whole body flinching before I could control it. Just Emma's mother picking her up. Just a door. But my hands were shaking, and I was 28 years old again, trapped in my first marriage, learning to read the warning signs in every sound. I'd thought I was past all that. I'd thought Sarah would never have to learn those same survival skills. 2 weeks later, the call came that shattered everything. "Mom?" Sarah's voice was cold formal, like she was reading from a script. "About the wedding. Brandon and I have been talking, and we think it's better if you don't come." The words didn't make sense at first. "What? You'll embarrass me. Brandon's family is very sophisticated, and you're just not going to fit in. You don't understand their world. It's better this way." Each word was a knife. "Sarah, I'm your mother. I know, but Brandon says—" She caught herself. "It's my decision, Mom. Please respect it." In the background, I heard a male voice, low and approving. "Good girl." My blood went cold. "Sarah, is he there with you right now? I have to go." Click. I sat in the silence of my empty house, my daughter's rejection echoing in my ears. But then I remembered something. 3 weeks ago, before Sarah's engagement call, an ivory envelope had arrived in my mailbox. The wedding invitation. I'd filled out the RSVP card immediately, checking, "Will attend with pleasure," and mailed it back. 2 days later, my phone had rung. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is Diane, Hartford, Brandon's mother. I just received your RSVP and I had to call. I'm so excited to finally meet Sarah's wonderful mother. She speaks so highly of you." We'd talked for 20 minutes. Diane had been warm, enthusiastic, genuinely thrilled that I was coming to the wedding. She'd even asked about my dietary restrictions for the reception dinner. So why was my daughter now telling me I wasn't invited? Why was Diane's son telling Sarah to uninvite her own mother? I pulled out my phone and found Thomas's number still saved in my contacts, even though he'd been dead for 3 years. I'd never been able to delete it. And now, staring at his name, I remembered our last real conversation the week before he died. "Barbara. I met Sarah's new boyfriend today. She brought him by the house while you were at the grocery store." Thomas had been frowning, which wasn't like him. He'd been a retired detective, calm and measured about everything. There's something off about him, too polished, too perfect. Every answer was exactly what you'd want to hear, but there was nothing real behind it. "Maybe he was just nervous," I'd said. "Maybe." But Thomas hadn't sounded convinced. "I think I'm going to do some digging. Run his background, see what comes up." He died of a heart attack 5 days later. Sudden, unexpected, devastating. The doctor said it was probably genetic. His father had died young, too. We'd buried him, and I'd been too buried in grief to think about Brandon Hartford, until now. I hung up the phone, my hands trembling. But what Sarah didn't know was that I had already sent my RSVP yes to her future mother-in-law 3 weeks ago, and Diane Hartford had personally called me to say how excited she was to finally meet me. So why was my daughter, who used to tell me everything, now lying to my face? And why did I hear Brandon's voice in the background coaching her through our conversation, like she was performing from a script he'd written? Something was very, very wrong. And I was going to find out what. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sarah's 5-year-old face looking up at me as I packed our belongings into trash bags, fleeing her biological father. I'd sworn then that my daughter would never know that kind of fear. I'd rebuilt our lives from nothing, met Thomas, given Sarah the stable, loving home she deserved. And now, somehow, she'd ended up with a man who coached her through phone calls like a puppet master pulling strings. By 3 a.m, I was sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop, typing Brandon Hartford into the search bar. The results were exactly what Sarah had described: impeccable. Harvard Law School, top of his class. Associate at Whitmore and Crane, one of Boston's most prestigious firms. Photos of him at charity galas, corporate events, museum fundraisers. In every image, he looked like he'd stepped out of a menswear catalog. Perfect suit, perfect smile, perfect posture. Too perfect. I clicked through to his social media profiles. His Instagram was public, curated like a magazine spread. Brandon at the Boston Symphony. Brandon sailing off Cape Cod. Brandon and Sarah at a gallery opening her in an elegant black dress I'd never seen before. I zoomed in on that photo. Brandon's hand rested on Sarah's shoulder, fingers curled around the joint in a grip that looked possessive rather than affectionate. I scrolled back through 2 years of photos. Every single one showed the same thing. His hand always on her, always controlling her position, her posture where she stood in relation to him. And Sarah, my vibrant, independent daughter, looked diminished somehow. Smaller. Her smiles never quite reached her eyes. I switched to Sarah's profile, which she'd made private about a year ago. From my limited view, I could see she'd removed every photo from before Brandon. Gone were the pictures of her college friends, her graduation, her study abroad in Spain. Gone were the goofy selfies and spontaneous moments. Her entire digital history had been erased and replaced with carefully posed shots of the life Brandon wanted her to project. Classic isolation. I thought my stomach turning. I'd seen this before, lived this before. Cut off the support system. Control the narrative. Make her dependent on you alone. I found a Harvard Law alumni newsletter from 3 years ago. Brandon's name appeared in a brief mention. The matter involving Brandon Hartford, 18, has been resolved to all parties' satisfaction. The dean's office considers the incident closed. No details. No explanation. Just the suggestion that something had happened and money or influence had made it disappear. What had he done? I needed to know more, but I'd hit a wall with public records. So I did something I probably shouldn't have. I called Diane Hartford's number again. She answered on the third ring, her voice cautious. Mrs. Mitchell. I'm sorry to bother you, Diane. I was just hoping we could talk about the wedding gift registry. Is Brandon there with you? She interrupted, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. What? No, I'm in Texas. I'm alone. I heard her exhale. Mrs. Mitchell, I need to tell you something, but you have to promise me you won't tell Sarah I said anything. Brandon can't know we spoke. My heart started pounding. I promise. Brandon always gets what he wants. Ever since he was a little boy, we've never been able to say no to him. She paused, and I heard something in her voice I recognized. Fear. His father taught him that the world belongs to men who take what they want. Diane, what are you trying to tell me? I'm so glad Sarah has a strong mother. She's going to need that support. She's going to need someone who won't give up on her. Is Sarah in danger? The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. Then barely audible, just don't let her disappear, Mrs. Mitchell. Some women do, and we never see them again. Before I could respond, she abruptly shifted tone, speaking loudly and cheerfully. So yes, we're thinking white roses for the centerpieces, Richard Darling. I'm on the phone with a florist. I'll be right there. The line went dead. I sat staring at my phone. Some women disappear. What did that mean? I went back to Sarah's social media, looking more carefully this time. 6 months ago, she'd posted a photo from a charity event. Sleeveless navy gown, pearl earrings, professional makeup. I downloaded the image and zoomed in. There on her upper arm, 5 dark bruises in a perfect finger mark pattern. Someone had grabbed her hard enough to leave marks that even makeup couldn't fully cover. I printed the photo with trembling hands and circled the bruises with a red pen. I knew those marks. 30 years ago, I'd hidden identical bruises under long sleeves and excuses. I'd told myself it would get better. I'd believed him when he said it was my fault that I made him angry, that if I just tried harder to be perfect, he'd stop. It took me 5 years to get out. I couldn't let Sarah waste 5 years of her life on the same nightmare. But then another memory surfaced, this one more recent and far more chilling. Thomas, a week before he died, sitting across from me at this same kitchen table. Barbara, I'm going to look into Brandon Hartford's background. Something about him reminds me of cases I worked as a detective, men who seem perfect on the surface, but leave bodies in their wake. That comment he made about his ex-girlfriends learning their place. That's not normal. That's predatory. 5 days later, Thomas collapsed in the driveway. Heart attack, the doctor said. Genetic predisposition, they explained. His father had died young, too. But Thomas had been perfectly healthy. He'd just passed his physical with flying colors. He ran 3 miles every morning, and he'd been about to investigate Brandon Hartford. I stared at the photo of bruises on my daughter's arm and for the first time let myself think the impossible thought. What if Thomas didn't die of natural causes? What if someone killed him to stop his investigation, that night staring at the photo of bruises on my daughter's arm? I remembered Thomas's exact words from the week before he died. Barbara, I'm going to look into Brandon Hartford's background. Something about him reminds me of cases I worked as a detective, men who seem perfect on the surface but leave bodies in their wake. I'd dismissed it as overprotective father instinct. Now my husband was dead from a heart attack at 62, perfectly healthy, no warning signs. Sarah had bruises shaped like fingerprints, and I couldn't shake the feeling that these two things were connected in a way I didn't want to believe. I booked a flight to Boston the next morning. 1 month until the wedding, and I couldn't wait any longer. Sarah had stopped answering my calls entirely. I had to see her face to face, had to look into her eyes, and know for certain whether my worst fears were true. The ticket cost nearly $400 I couldn't really afford, but I didn't care. I packed an overnight bag, left a note for my neighbor to water my plants, and caught the red-eye to Logan Airport. Boston hit me like a wall of cold intimidation. I'd never been to the city before, and as my taxi wound through streets lined with historic brownstones and gleaming high-rises, I felt myself shrinking. Sarah's apartment building was in the Back Bay. The driver told me one of the most expensive neighborhoods in the country. When we pulled up to a towering glass and steel structure, I understood for the first time why Sarah might see me as an embarrassment. The lobby was all marble floors and modern art with a doorman in a uniform that probably cost more than my monthly pension. I approached the security desk, my worn coat and department store purse, suddenly feeling like neon signs announcing I didn't belong. "I'm here to see Sarah Mitchell," I said, trying to sound confident. "Apartment 1507. The receptionist looked me up and down with barely concealed disdain. "Is Ms. Mitchell expecting you? I'm her mother." She picked up the phone with obvious skepticism. After a moment, I heard a male voice come through the speaker, calm and controlled. "Mrs. Mitchell." What a surprise. "Sarah's not home right now, but please do come up. We should talk, you and I." Brandon. I hadn't expected to meet him without Sarah there as a buffer. The receptionist handed me a visitor badge, and I walked to the elevator on legs that felt unsteady. As I rode up to the 15th floor, I caught my reflection in the mirrored walls. For just a moment, I saw myself at 28. That terrified woman fleeing an abusive husband with a 5-year-old child. Everything we owned stuffed into trash bags. The same fear was in my eyes now that had been there then. The elevator doors opened, and Brandon Hartford was waiting in the hallway. He was exactly as polished as his photos suggested, expensive suit, perfect posture smile that looked painted on. "Mrs. Mitchell, What a pleasure to finally meet you. He extended his hand. I shook it briefly. His grip was firm, controlled, calculated. Please come in. He stepped aside, gesturing into the apartment. The space was immaculate and soulless. Everything was white and chrome and glass, like a hotel suite, designed by someone who'd never actually lived anywhere. I looked for signs of Sarah photos, her favorite books, anything personal. There was nothing. It was as if my daughter had been erased. Can I offer you coffee, water? Brandon moved toward the kitchen with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to controlling every situation. No, thank you. Every instinct told me not to accept anything from this man. He smiled slightly, as if he'd expected that answer. I suppose you're wondering why Sarah asked you not to come to the wedding. She didn't ask. You told her to uninvite me. The smile didn't falter, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Sarah makes her own decisions, Mrs. Mitchell. I simply help her understand what's best. I saw the bruises on her arm. For a microsecond, his expression cracked. Then he laughed, smooth and dismissive. Oh, that. Tennis accident. Sarah's been learning to play. She's quite clumsy, I'm afraid, but she's improving. With proper guidance, she'll get there. The way he said proper guidance made my skin crawl. Sarah's still learning to behave appropriately in professional circles. He continued, settling into an armchair like he was holding court. Small-town habits die hard, as I'm sure you understand. She has potential, of course, but it requires significant refinement. He was talking about my daughter like she was a project, a thing to be molded. On the coffee table, his phone buzzed. I caught a glimpse of the caller ID, the collector. Brandon grabbed it immediately, silenced it, and flipped it face down. Popular man, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Business. His smile had edges now. The sound of a key in the lock made us both turn. Sarah walked in arms full of shopping bags and froze when she saw me. Mom? Her voice cracked with fear. What are you doing here? Before I could answer, Brandon was behind her, his hand settling on her shoulder. I watched his fingers dig in, not obviously, but enough that Sarah's whole body tensed. Your mother came to visit, Brandon said smoothly. Isn't that thoughtful? Sarah's eyes met mine, and I saw everything I needed to know. Terror, helplessness, a silent plea I couldn't decipher. Can we talk privately? I asked. Anything you say to me you can say in front of Brandon. The words came out mechanical, rehearsed. We don't have secrets. Sarah, I saw the bruises. She pulled her cardigan sleeve down defensively. I'm clumsy. Brandon's right about that. I need to be more careful. She was protecting him, defending him, making his abuse her fault. Brandon smiled at me victoriously. Sarah, why don't you show your mother the wedding binder while I make some calls? He kissed the top of her head, a gesture that looked affectionate but felt possessive, and walked into the kitchen. The moment he was out of sight, Sarah grabbed my arm. Mom, please go, she whispered urgently. You're making this harder. Harder for who? She opened her mouth to answer, but Brandon's voice called from the kitchen, Sarah, do you want tea? Coming. She released my arm and stepped back, and I saw her hand move briefly protectively to her stomach before she caught herself and stopped. Was she? No, she couldn't be. Brandon returned, all false warmth gone. Mrs. Mitchell, I think it's time I escorted you out. His hand clamped around my arm as we walked to the elevator tight enough that I knew it would bruise, tight enough that I finally understood exactly how Sarah had gotten those marks. When the elevator doors closed and we were alone, Brandon leaned in close. His voice was soft, almost intimate, which somehow made it more terrifying. Sarah has made her choice. She's building a new life here, a better life than small-town Texas could ever offer. If you truly love your daughter, you'll let her go and stop interfering. He paused, his grip tightening. Because if you don't, well, let's just say accidents happen to people who don't mind their own business. Your husband Thomas knew that. Didn't he? Knew it quite well. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. Brandon released my arm and smiled pleasantly. Safe travels, Mrs. Mitchell. As I walked out of that building into cold Boston air, Brandon's words about Thomas played on repeat. Accidents happen to people who don't mind their own business. Your husband knew that, didn't he? The phrasing was too specific, too pointed. I pulled out my phone and searched what I should have searched 3 years ago. Thomas Mitchell death, Austin, Texas, suspicious. The results made my blood freeze. A Reddit thread from local Austin forum. Former detective Thomas Mitchell dies suddenly. Anyone else think this seems off? Comments from people who knew him. Tom was healthiest guy I knew. He called me the day before, said he was investigating something big involving Boston elite. His death was ruled heart attack, but something doesn't add up. I'd dismissed these as conspiracy theories at the time. Now, standing outside my daughter's prison disguised as luxury apartment, I knew the truth. Thomas had been murdered, and Sarah was next. I couldn't go back to my hotel, not yet. My hands were still shaking from Brandon's grip on my arm, and his threat about Thomas echoed in my head like a warning bell I'd ignored too long. I needed to think, to figure out what to do next, so I ducked into a small cafe 2 blocks from Sarah's building and ordered coffee I had no intention of drinking. The cafe was crowded with the lunch rush, and I welcomed the noise and anonymity. I pulled out my phone and read through those Reddit comments again, each one confirming what I already knew in my gut. Thomas hadn't died of natural causes. He'd been investigating Brandon, and someone had silenced him. I was so absorbed in my phone that I didn't notice the young woman approaching until she slid into the chair across from me. "You're Sarah's mother, aren't you?" she said quietly. I looked up, startled. She was in her mid-20s, professionally dressed in a charcoal blazer and jeans with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. But her eyes were anxious, darting toward the cafe entrance every few seconds, like she expected someone to burst through. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" "I'm Emma Hartford, Brandon's sister." She leaned forward urgently. "Please don't leave, I need to talk to you." Every muscle in my body tensed. Another Hartford. Was this a trap? Had Brandon sent his sister to intimidate me further, but Emma's fear looked genuine. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled a worn notebook from her bag, and she kept glancing over her shoulder like a hunted animal. "How did you find me?" I asked carefully. "I've been watching the building. I saw you leave. I recognized you from old photos Sarah used to have on her phone before Brandon made her delete every trace of her previous life." She paused. "I tried to warn Sarah months ago, but Brandon cut off all contact between us. He monitors everything. Her phone, her email, even her friendships. I can't get through to her." I studied her face, looking for the same cold calculation I'd seen in Brandon's eyes. Instead, I saw something else, desperation tinged with genuine terror. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're the only person who might be able to help her, and because—" Emma's voice dropped even lower. "You need to know what my brother is capable of." She opened the notebook, and I saw pages filled with handwritten notes, dates, names, newspaper clippings taped in. This wasn't casual concern. This was documentation. Investigation. Brandon had 2 serious girlfriends before Sarah, Emma said. 4 years ago, there was a woman named Rachel. They dated for 8 months, and then suddenly she moved to Europe. That's what my parents told everyone. But I heard them fighting that last night. I heard crying, shouting from Brandon's room. The next day, she was just gone. My parents said it was a bad breakup and refused to discuss it. I felt cold, despite the cafe's warmth. 2 years ago, there was Jennifer Cole. They were engaged. Wedding planned, venue, booked invitations sent. Then 3 weeks before the wedding, Jennifer broke it off. My parents' lawyer showed up with papers for her to sign, and she disappeared from Boston entirely. I tried to find her to warn Sarah, but it's like she vanished. Emma pulled out photocopies of medical records from her notebook. I managed to get these before they were sealed. Jennifer Cole's hospital visits over 18 months, broken wrist from a fall, cracked ribs from tripping on stairs, concussion from walking into a door. Does any of this sound familiar? It sounded exactly like the excuses I'd made 30 years ago. Exactly like Sarah saying she was clumsy. My father taught Brandon everything he knows. Emma continued, her voice barely audible. And my father? Let's just say our family has been very good at making problems disappear for a very long time. What kind of problems? Emma hesitated, fear flickering across her face. I overheard my father and Brandon talking late one night about 6 months ago. They were in my father's study and I was passing by. Brandon said something about passing the test and joining the circle. My father said, "Soon you'll be a full member just like I promised." It sounded like some kind of club, something exclusive. The Collector. I remembered the caller ID on Brandon's phone. Mrs. Mitchell, I think my family is part of something bigger, something organized. And I think Sarah is in more danger than either of us fully understands. Before I could respond, Emma pulled out a burner phone and pressed it into my hand. The wedding is being live-streamed for guests who can't attend. I have the password. Watch it. Watch carefully. I think Brandon is planning something, but I don't know what. You want me to just watch while Sarah? If you show up in person, Brandon will know. He'll escalate. But if you're watching remotely, you can document everything. You can be a witness he doesn't know about. Emma stood abruptly. I have to go. Use this phone to contact me. Don't use your regular one. My family has resources you can't imagine. Emma, wait. There's something I need to ask you. I grabbed her wrist. My husband Thomas died 3 years ago. Brandon said something today that made me think, did he have anything to do with it? Emma's face went pale. Mrs. Mitchell there was another woman who tried to leave Brandon 3 years ago. Her name was Catherine Brennan. They found her dead at the bottom of a staircase. Police ruled it an accidental fall. She pulled her wrist free gently. I don't believe in coincidences anymore. If your husband was investigating Brandon, then yes. I think that's exactly why he's dead. She was already backing away, melting into the lunchtime crowd, but she pressed something else into my palm, a small USB drive. Don't open this until after the wedding, she whispered. It's insurance. Evidence I've been gathering. If anything happens to me, you'll have proof. About Brandon, about my family, about all of them. Then she was gone, disappeared into the Boston streets, leaving me sitting there with a burner phone and a USB drive that apparently contained secrets dangerous enough to kill for. I returned to my hotel room and stared at the USB drive Emma had given me, turning it over in my hands. Every instinct screamed to plug it in immediately, to see what evidence was so dangerous Emma feared for her life. But I'd promised to wait until after the wedding. Instead, I did something else. I called the Austin Police Department and asked about Thomas Mitchell's death investigation. The detective who answered listened to my questions, then said something that changed everything. Ma'am, we actually did think something was suspicious about your husband's death. Detective Mitchell had called our department the day before he died, said he was investigating potential homicide-for-hire network operating in Boston. He was going to send us files the next morning. But then he died, and the files never came. We tried to pursue it, but the case got buried from above. Someone with serious power didn't want us looking into it. I hung up, knowing for certain my husband had been murdered, and my daughter was living with his killer. I flew home to Texas the next day with murder on my mind. Not revenge, not yet. but the cold certainty that Thomas had been killed because he'd gotten too close to the truth about Brandon Hartford. The Austin detective's words haunted me, a homicide for hire network. How deep did this go? How many people were involved? The week before the wedding crawled by in agonizing slow motion. I heard nothing from Sarah. Every call went to voicemail. Every text went unanswered. It was as if she'd already disappeared. Then 6 days before the ceremony, a package arrived at my door. Inside was an elegant designer dress in my size deep navy blue with a modest neckline. The note was in Emma's handwriting. In case you change your mind about attending, you should look like you belong. But I understand if you decide to stay home, sometimes the best help comes from distance. I hung the dress in my closet, but I knew I wouldn't wear it. Emma was right. Distance was safer. If I showed up in Boston, Brandon would see it as a declaration of war, and Sarah would pay the price. No, I needed to be invisible. A witness he didn't know existed. I drove to the electronics store in the next town over and bought a new smartphone with the best camera and recording capabilities I could afford. $300 I couldn't spare, but money didn't matter anymore. At home, I set up my laptop on the dining room table with the screen positioned perfectly. I created multiple browser windows so I could capture different angles if the camera moved. I downloaded the screen recording software Emma had texted me about, tested it a dozen times to make sure it would keep recording even if the live stream cut out. I even bought a backup battery pack in case the power failed. I was leaving nothing to chance. Sitting in that living room surrounded by technology I barely understood, I had a flash of memory so vivid it hurt. Sarah at 7 years old sitting at this same piano, struggling through Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Thomas beside her, patient and encouraging. Me in the kitchen making dinner, listening to them laugh together. We'd been so happy, so normal. How had we gone from piano lessons and bedtime stories to this? To me preparing to record evidence of my daughter being abused at her own wedding. The morning of the wedding, I woke at 5 a.m. to find an email from Sarah's account waiting in my inbox. My heart leapt, finally, she was reaching out. But as I read that, hope curdled into dread. Mom, I'm sorry for everything, but this is my choice. Please respect it and don't try to contact me anymore after today. I need to move forward with my new life. Sarah. I read it 3 times, analyzing every word. Sarah never apologized without explaining what she was sorry for. She'd never tell me not to contact her no matter how angry she was. The email was sent at 6 a.m. Boston time, 7 a.m. there, and Sarah had never been an early riser in her life. And the signature. Just Sarah. No love, no XOXO, nothing. Brandon had written this, or he'd forced her to write it while standing over her shoulder. I typed back anyway, though I knew it was probably futile. Sarah, if you're reading this, I love you, always, no matter what happens today or any day. You are my daughter and nothing will ever change that. Mom. I hit send and waited. No response. While my email was open, I noticed something in my spam folder, a message from 4 months ago with the subject line, "Your daughter is in danger. Please read." The sender was listed as a friend at securedmail.com. I clicked it, hands trembling. The message body was blank. The account had been deleted. But that subject line remained a ghost of a warning I'd missed because I hadn't been looking in the right place. Had Emma sent this? Or had it been someone else trying to help Sarah before it was too late? At 5 p.m., I sat down at my laptop with a cup of coffee I wouldn't drink and opened the live stream link. I entered the password Emma had given me. The screen flickered, then filled with an image of breathtaking opulence. The ballroom of Boston's most prestigious hotel stretched across my screen in a sea of white roses and crystal. Massive chandeliers sparkled overhead. A full orchestra sat in the corner, playing something classical I didn't recognize. Over 200 guests filled the chairs, all of them dripping with wealth. Designer gowns, expensive jewelry, the kind of casual elegance that comes from old money. The camera panned across the crowd, and I spotted Diane Hartford in a pale blue dress. She looked haunted, her face drawn and pale, gripping her husband Richard's arm. Or was he gripping hers? From this distance, I couldn't tell which of them was holding on and which was holding down. Then I saw Emma standing deliberately apart from her family, positioned near the back. She looked directly at the camera just for a moment, and I could have sworn she was looking at me, letting me know she was there, that I wasn't alone in this. The processional music began. The camera shifted to the end of the aisle, and there was Sarah. She looked beautiful, heartbreakingly beautiful, in a white gown that must have cost more than my car. Her hair was swept up in an elaborate style. Her makeup was perfect, but her eyes were empty. Dead. She walked down that aisle like a prisoner walking to her execution, each step mechanical and stiff. Brandon waited at the altar in an immaculate tuxedo, that same cold smile I'd seen in my own living room. He watched Sarah approach like a man watching a possession being delivered. The minister began speaking. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." My finger hovered over the record button. I was capturing everything. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. As Sarah reached the altar and the camera zoomed in for a close-up, Brandon's hand moved to his jacket pocket. He pulled something out, something small, and quickly returned it. I immediately hit pause and rewound the footage. I watched it again, and again. It looked like a small vial, or maybe a syringe. I couldn't tell for certain, but it was something that didn't belong at a wedding ceremony. I saved that segment of video, my heart pounding. Was I being paranoid? Seeing threats where there were none? As the ceremony began and Sarah took her place beside Brandon at the altar, I noticed something that made my breath catch. Sarah kept glancing toward the camera, not at the guests, not at Brandon, but directly at the camera lens. Like she was looking for someone specific. Looking for me. Then she did something that confirmed my worst fear. She touched her stomach. Just briefly, unconsciously. The protective gesture pregnant women make without thinking. Oh, God. Oh, God, no. Was Sarah pregnant? Was my daughter carrying Brandon Hartford's child? And if she was, did Brandon know? Because if he didn't and she was planning to tell him after the wedding, I grabbed my phone to call Emma to warn someone, but then Sarah began speaking her vows and I froze, watching helplessly from 2,000 miles away as whatever was about to happen began to unfold. The minister's voice filled my speakers. "Do you, Sarah Mitchell, take Brandon Hartford to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Sarah stood silent. The pause stretched too long. I watched guests on screen begin to shift in their seats, exchanging glances, say something I thought desperately. Say no. Say anything. Then I saw Brandon's hand tighten around Sarah's. The camera caught it perfectly. His knuckles going white, his grip crushing. Sarah flinched. "I do." Her voice was barely a whisper, trembling and small. "And do you, Brandon Hartford, take Sarah Mitchell to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I absolutely do." His voice rang with confidence, almost triumph, like he'd just closed a business deal in his favor. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Brandon pulled Sarah into a kiss that made my stomach turn. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't tender. It was claiming. Ownership. Several guests applauded awkwardly, while others whispered to each other with concerned expressions. The ceremony transitioned into the reception. The camera showed guests mingling champagne glasses, clinking the orchestra playing something elegant and forgettable. Sarah sat at the head table, pushing food around her plate, staring into nothing, while celebrations swirled around her. I kept recording, my hands shaking so badly I had to grip the edge of the table. Then Brandon stood tapping his crystal glass for attention. "Thank you all for being here to witness this important day," he began smoothly. "When I first met Sarah 2 years ago, I knew immediately she was moldable, teachable, someone with potential." A few guests laughed nervously. Moldable. Who describes their wife as moldable? Sarah came from humble beginnings, small-town Texas simple life. But I've taught her about the finer things. How to dress appropriately, how to speak in sophisticated company, how to behave in our world. Sarah stared at her plate, hands trembling. A great philosopher once said, "A woman is like clay in the right hands, she becomes a work of art." Well, ladies and gentlemen, Sarah is my masterpiece. I felt physically sick. This wasn't a love speech. This was a man declaring ownership of a possession he'd sculpted to his specifications. The camera panned briefly to a table of young men in expensive suits, Brandon's friends presumably. They watched with strange smiles, and one raised his glass toward Brandon, mouthing words I couldn't quite make out, but that looked like "Welcome to the club." Then the MC's voice, "And now the bride will say a few words." Sarah stood slowly. She took the microphone and I leaned so close to my laptop screen, my nose almost touched it. She looked directly at the camera, directly at me. "I want to thank everyone for coming today to celebrate." Her voice was steady, clearer than her vows had been. "Especially my mother, who taught me what real strength looks like, who showed me that love means never giving up on someone even when they push you away." Brandon's expression darkened. His jaw clenched. Sarah turned to face him. "Brandon, you wanted a wife who would obey, who would disappear into your perfect world, who would be your masterpiece, as you said." The guests looked confused. Was this romantic a joke? Sarah's voice grew stronger. "But I need to say something. In front of all these people, in front of everyone watching this live stream." I stopped breathing. "I'm not your wife." Gasps erupted from the crowd. "I'm your prisoner." The silence that followed lasted maybe 2 seconds. But I'll remember those 2 seconds for the rest of my life because I saw what was coming. Brandon's hand flew across Sarah's face with a crack that echoed through the microphone. The slap was vicious, full force meant to hurt. Sarah felt her white dress pooling around her on the floor, her hand pressed to her reddening cheek. Then chaos. Screams. Guests jumping to their feet. People pulling out phones, filming from every angle. Brandon standing over Sarah, his face twisted with rage. "You ungrateful!" Security rushed in. Richard Hartford was shouting orders. Diane Hartford was screaming. Emma already had her phone out calling someone. The main camera shook violently. The operator had dropped it in shock. I could see multiple other phones held high, everyone recording, everyone capturing this moment from different angles. Then the main livestream cut to black. But my screen recording kept running, capturing every second in perfect clarity. The livestream went dark, but my laptop had recorded everything in perfect clarity. My hands shook so badly I could barely control the mouse. I needed to call 911, needed to call Boston police, needed to. The burner phone Emma gave me buzzed with incoming text. "Do not call police yet. Hartford family owns half of Boston PD. They'll bury this. Post the video publicly. Make it viral before they can scrub all footage. It's the only way to save her if everyone sees it. They can't make it disappear. You have maybe 1 hour before they control the narrative. Post it now. Trust me. E. My cursor hovered over the upload button. Was this right? Would posting this publicly help Sarah or put her in more danger? But then I remembered Sarah's eyes when she looked at that camera before her speech. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't panicking. She looked determined. Like she knew exactly what was going to happen. Like she'd planned this. Oh my God. My daughter had deliberately provoked him to hit her on camera. This was her plan all along. I didn't hesitate. Emma was right. If the Hartford family had enough power to bury a murder investigation, they could certainly make a wedding assault disappear. But they couldn't erase something the entire world had already seen. My hands shook so badly, it took 3 tries to open the video editing software. I clipped the footage to show only Sarah's speech and the slap, removing everything before and after. I didn't want any detail that could be used against Sarah later. The file exported in agonizing slow motion. Following Emma's instructions from days ago, I activated the VPN on my laptop. Then I created an anonymous Twitter account, Witness to Truth 2024. I uploaded the video and wrote with trembling fingers, "Groom physically assaults bride at Boston Society wedding. This woman needs our help. Please share. Justice for the bride, mass domestic violence." I hit post at 6:47 p.m. Then I uploaded the same clip to Reddit's public freakout forum and sent the raw footage to every Boston news station's tip line I could find. CNN, NBC, ABC, local affiliates. I sent it everywhere. For the first 10 minutes, nothing happened. I refreshed my feed obsessively, wondering if I'd failed, if I'd exposed my daughter for nothing. Then the numbers started moving. 50 views, 100, 500. The retweets began slowly at first, then faster. 1,000, 2,000. Comments flooded in. Who is this man? Someone find this woman. This is horrifying. Within 2 hours, 500,000 people had watched it. By midnight, 20 million. The hashtag #Justice for the Bride was trending #1 worldwide. Celebrities were tweeting. Politicians were making statements. My daughter's face was everywhere, and I didn't know if I'd saved her or destroyed her. Then I noticed something odd. A ProPublica journalist named Kate Morrison posted a detailed thread about the Hartford family within hours of my video going viral. The Hartford family has a documented history of alleged violence cover-ups spanning decades. She wrote with specifics about legal cases, settlements, women who'd disappeared. Information that should have taken weeks to compile was posted within hours. How did she have this ready so quickly unless someone had given it to her in advance? Unless this had all been coordinated. The next day, the Hartford family held a press conference. Richard Hartford stood at a podium with Diane beside him and Brandon, whose arm was suddenly in a sling that hadn't been there at the wedding. "Our son is the victim here," Richard said smoothly. "Sarah Mitchell has severe documented mental health issues our family tried to help her address. What you witnessed was a psychotic breakdown." Brandon was defending himself. "We have medical records and will provide everything to authorities." I wanted to scream. They were painting Sarah as the aggressor, the crazy one. But then Emma Hartford did something extraordinary. She held her own press conference, alone, without her family. I watched her tear-stained face fill my screen. "My brother Brandon has a documented history of violence against women. I have medical records, hospital documentation, witness statements from previous victims. I'm done protecting him." She handed reporters a thick press packet. Jennifer Cole's NDA, hospital records showing injuries, statements from friends. Documentation about Melissa Hartley. The evidence was too detailed, too professional. She'd been building this case for months, maybe years. Someone had helped her prepare all of this long before the wedding. My regular phone rang. Boston area code. Mrs. Mitchell, Detective Lisa Morrison, Boston Police. We need to speak with you about the video you posted. We've tracked the upload. We need your cooperation. I booked a flight for the next morning. At the police station, Detective Morrison led me to an interview room. We're investigating the assault, but we're also looking into something your daughter mentioned, concerns about her stepfather's death 3 years ago. My throat tightened. Thomas died of a heart attack. What does that have to do with Brandon? She pulled out a file. We subpoenaed Brandon Hartford's financial records. We found a wire transfer of $50,000 to a medical consultant in Austin named Marcus Webb, sent 1 week before your husband's death. She slid printouts across the table. Emails from Brandon's archived accounts. Subject obstacle removal. Target Thomas Mitchell, age 62, retired detective. Subject has become too perceptive. Needs to be eliminated before I can proceed with relationship with his stepdaughter. I couldn't breathe. More emails. Communication with Dr. Webb about an untraceable compound that induces cardiac arrest. Confirmation of payment. A final message. Subject expired as expected. Natural causes ruling confirmed. Clean resolution. Thomas was murdered, I whispered. Dr. Webb is under federal investigation. He kept detailed records. Thomas Mitchell's name is in his files. We have enough evidence to charge Brandon Hartford with first-degree murder. My husband, my kind, protective husband, who'd sensed something wrong and paid for it with his life. My phone rang. Unknown number. Detective Morrison nodded for me to answer. I put it on speaker. Mom! Sarah's voice was barely audible, raw with terror. Mom, he knows you posted the video. He's locked me in the apartment. He has a gun. He says if the video isn't taken down in 1 hour, he'll make it look like I killed myself. Mom, I'm so sorry. The line went dead. As I sat in that police station trying to process that my husband was murdered, that Sarah had been Brandon's target for years before they even coincidentally met, my phone rang. Unknown number. Every instinct said, don't answer. But something made me pick up. Mom! Sarah's voice barely a whisper, raw with terror. Mom, he knows. He knows you posted the video. He somehow figured it out. He's locked me in the apartment. He has a gun. He says if the video isn't taken down within an hour, if every copy isn't deleted, he'll make it look like I vanished out of shame for my breakdown. Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have warned you this would happen. The line went dead. I looked at Detective Morrison, whose face had turned pale. We have an active emergency, she said, quickly grabbing her radio. All units, possible abduction in progress. Dangerous, suspect, female victim. Detective Morrison was already coordinating response teams when my phone rang again. Sarah's number flashed on the screen. I hit record before answering. Mom, please, she cried, her voice shaking. Take down the video. Delete it everywhere. He says he'll hurt me if you don't. Then Brandon's voice cut through calm and chilling. Tell her exactly what I said. She has 1 hour. If that video stays online, the world will believe the story. I've prepared a tragic fall from grace, a heartbroken bride who couldn't face the truth. Very tragic. Very believable. Very believable. Mom, did you hear? Please, I'm begging. Sarah, listen to me carefully. I forced strength into my voice. I love you. Do you understand me? I love you. No matter what. I love you too, Mom. I wish I had listened to you. Brandon grabbed the phone. Mrs. Mitchell, simple choice for you, your daughter's life, or your viral moment of fame. 60 minutes starting now. After that, Sarah Mitchell Hartford dies from self-inflicted wounds. People will say, such a shame the mental illness. Choose wisely, piano teacher. If you hurt her, there is nowhere on earth you can hide. He laughed. Hide from whom? The police my father donates to the judges we golf with. You're a piano teacher from a dying Texas town. I'm a Hartford. We've been making inconvenient problems disappear for 3 generations. 60 minutes, Mrs. Mitchell. The line went dead. Detective Morrison was already moving. We're mobilizing hostage negotiation and SWAT. These situations require careful de-escalation. This could take hours. No. I pulled out my phone, opening the camera. I have a better idea. Barbara, don't. I hit record, my face filling the screen, raw and tear-stained. My name is Barbara Mitchell. Right now, my daughter Sarah Mitchell is being held hostage by Brandon Hartford at 847 Commonwealth Avenue, apartment 1507. He has a gun. He's threatening to kill her if the video isn't deleted. I will not delete that video. I will not let him hide what he did. If anything happens to my daughter, he is responsible. Brandon, if you're watching, you want to punish someone, come after me. Leave Sarah alone. I posted it everywhere before Detective Morrison could stop me. Within minutes, my phone exploded with notifications. Thousands of shares. News helicopters scrambling. The building address broadcast on national television. By the time we arrived, hundreds of people had gathered outside Sarah's building. Protesters, media, concerned citizens chanting, "Save Sarah." Police barriers went up, but the witnesses changed everything. Brandon couldn't make her disappear with the world watching. SWAT teams took positions. Police evacuated neighboring apartments. The hostage negotiator tried calling. No answer. 5 attempts, all ignored. 30 agonizing minutes passed. I stared up at the 15th floor windows. Emma Hartford appeared beside me, oddly calm. "You did it," she said quietly. "You made it impossible for them to make her disappear. This was the only way." Something about her tone struck me as strange. She wasn't panicking. She looked almost relieved. The negotiator's voice over the radio, "Mr. Hartford, we just want everyone safe." Brandon's reply, "Tell everyone to leave or I'll bang." The gunshot cracked across the street. The crowd screamed. My knees buckled. "Shots fired, move in." SWAT breached the door. 2 minutes of hell. Sirens, shouting. Prayer. The radio crackled. 2 individuals down, female victim alive, injured but breathing. Male suspect also down wounded. Alive. Sarah was alive. I broke through police lines and ran. EMTs rushed out with gurneys. Brandon, first shoulder wound, handcuffed, furious. Then Sarah. Blood on her face. Bruises on her neck. But her eyes were open. As they wheeled her past, Sarah pressed something small into my palm. "Mom, it worked. I got him. Everything's recorded." She squeezed my hand around the tiny device. "Give it to Detective Morrison. Evidence. The whole plan." The ambulance sped away. I stood holding the recording device, mind reeling. What plan? I looked at Emma. She wasn't shocked. She looked relieved, like a gamble had paid off. "Emma," I said slowly, "how long have you and Sarah been planning this?" Emma met my eyes. 8 months, Barbara. Sarah's been recording everything for 8 months. The wedding. The slap. Even the hostage situation, she knew he'd escalate. Knew you'd go public. Knew police would respond with everyone watching. She's been building a case that even the Hartfords can't make disappear. Your daughter didn't need rescuing, Barbara. She was rescuing herself. We just needed to make sure the world was watching when she did it. 8 months. Sarah had been planning this for 8 months while I'd been desperately trying to save her. I rode to the hospital in Detective Morrison's cruiser, Emma beside me, the recording device clutched in my trembling hand. Nothing made sense. Everything I'd thought I understood had been a carefully orchestrated performance. At the hospital, they'd taken Sarah to a private room under police guard. I rushed through the corridors and found her sitting up in bed, a split lip, bandaged dark bruises blooming across her throat, where Brandon had tried to strangle her. But her eyes were clear, alert, alive. "Mom!" She reached for my hand, and I grabbed it like a lifeline, tears streaming down my face. "You're okay. Thank God you're okay." "Mom, I need to tell you the truth. All of it. The whole truth about the last 8 months. Sweetheart, just rest. You're safe now. That's all that matters." "No." Her grip tightened. "You need to understand. I wasn't just surviving this relationship. I was documenting it. I was building a case." She explained it all. 8 months ago, Emma had given her a sophisticated recording device hidden in a necklace she wore every day. Every threat, every controlling conversation, every violent act. 8 months of audio evidence documenting systematic abuse. "But baby," I said, confusion and hurt warring in my chest. "If you had 8 months of evidence, why didn't you just leave? Why stay and endure more?" Sarah's expression hardened with a determination I'd never seen before. "Mom, 8 months ago, I found something on Brandon's laptop. He's part of a network called The Collector. Wealthy men who systematically abuse women and share techniques. They have meetings, rankings, training materials. It's organized, Mom. 50 men doing this to 50 women like it's a game." My blood ran cold. When I discovered it, I realized if I just leave Brandon, some other woman takes my place. And it's not just him, it's dozens of men. So I decided to take down the entire network. Emma isn't just Brandon's sister. She's an investigative journalist with ProPublica. She's been investigating The Collector for 3 years. She gave me the tools, taught me how to gather evidence. The wedding speech, we rehearsed it for weeks. We knew Brandon would lose control if I defied him publicly. We needed him to show his true nature on camera with witnesses he couldn't buy off. "You planned to provoke him into hitting you." Horror flooded through me. "I was being hit anyway," Sarah said quietly, "in private where no one saw. I chose to make one incident public where it mattered, where it couldn't be erased. Yes, it was dangerous. But this way, I had control. I had Emma monitoring. I made sure if anything went wrong, the world would know." I struggled to process it. "You could have been killed." Staying with him quietly was slow suicide. This way I saved myself and helped save others. That recording device has evidence on 47 network members. Emma's publishing everything. Other women will be saved because I took this risk. "I thought I was saving you," I whispered. "You did, Mom. Without you posting that video, the Hartfords would have buried everything. You made it viral before they could control the narrative. You forced police to respond. We did this together." The door opened. Detective Morrison entered, her expression grave. "Sarah, Brandon Hartford's attorneys have filed attempted murder charges against you. They claim you lured him to the apartment intending to kill him, that you shot without provocation." "What?" I stood up. SWAT witnessed him holding a gun to her head. The Hartford family has significant resources. They're going to fight with everything they have. This legal battle is just beginning. Sarah's hand moved to her stomach in a protective gesture I'd seen before. Then she looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Mom, there's one more thing. Something that changes everything." She took a shaky breath. "I'm pregnant. 15 weeks. The world tilted. My grandchild. But also Brandon Hartford's child. I found out 8 weeks ago. Brandon doesn't know I never told him. When he tried to kill me, I was carrying his baby. Our baby survived all of that." Her voice broke. "And now I don't know if I can bring his child into this world. How do I love a baby that's half him?" As Sarah's words sank in, pregnant 15 weeks. Brandon's child, I felt joy and horror collide so violently in my chest, I thought my heart would stop. My grandchild. Thomas's grandchild in every way that mattered, even if not by blood. But also Brandon Hartford's biological child. The child of the man who murdered my husband, who nearly murdered my daughter. And as Detective Morrison's phone began ringing with calls from Hartford family lawyers, already filing motions and pulling strings, as I realized this legal battle was just beginning, I understood we weren't just fighting for Sarah's freedom anymore. We were fighting for an innocent life that hadn't asked to be born into this nightmare. And I would burn down the world before I let the Hartfords take this baby from us. 1 week later, FBI agent Chen sat across from Sarah and me in a safe house outside Boston, a thick file folder between us. Sarah was out of the hospital, but still healing, her hand resting on the small bump just beginning to show. Mrs. Mitchell, I need to walk you through what we've reconstructed from Brandon Hartford's digital footprint. This goes back 4 years. 4 years. Before Sarah even moved to Boston. Agent Chen showed us the timeline. Brandon had identified Sarah as a target 4 years ago, shortly after Thomas died. There were surveillance photos, Sarah walking to her car, sitting in coffee shops completely unaware. Psychological profiles, background research. He'd been stalking her for over a year before they met. Thomas noticed. Agent Chen said quietly, "Your husband saw someone watching Sarah and started investigating." He slid an email across the table. From Brandon to Dr. Marcus Webb. Target Thomas Mitchell must be eliminated. Former detective asking dangerous questions. He has heart disease history, exploit that. Another email. Doctor. Webb's response. Untraceable cardiac arrest compound delivered. Subject should expire within 72 hours. Death will appear natural. Thomas died 5 days later. No autopsy because of his family history. I couldn't breathe. Sarah grabbed my hand, both of us crying. "He was protecting me," I whispered. "Thomas died trying to protect Sarah and I never knew." "This is my fault," Sarah choked out. "Dad died because of me." "No," Agent Chen said firmly. "Thomas died because Brandon Hartford is a murderer. That's on him." Within 48 hours, the Hartford legal machine mobilized. They hired Marcus Levine, Boston's most ruthless attorney, launching criminal charges against Sarah and a massive PR campaign. Hartford-friendly media suggested the viral video was taken out of context, that Sarah had provoked Brandon, pointing to her grief therapy as evidence of instability. Richard Hartford appeared on television. "My son is the victim of a disturbed young woman and her conspiracy theorist mother." Detective Morrison warned the Hartfords had connections everywhere. "We need an airtight case." I emptied my retirement account $47,000 to hire Rebecca Walsh, a fierce attorney known for winning impossible domestic violence cases. Rebecca reviewed our evidence. "We can win this, but they'll drag Sarah through hell. Are you prepared?" Sarah's hand went to her belly. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect my baby." Rebecca organized a strategy meeting with Emma Detective Morrison and Agent Chen. Emma revealed the collector network's full scope, 47 members across 12 states, with documentation of meetings and training materials. Brandon's code name was the Groom. The wedding was his initiation test. "Sarah's pregnancy complicates our strategy," Rebecca said. "How do you want to handle this publicly?" "Make it public," Sarah said firmly. "I want the world to know I was 15 weeks pregnant when he tried to kill me." Agent Chen's phone rang. He listened, then looked at us. "We've located Melissa Hartley in Canada. She's willing to testify. She was pregnant when Brandon abused her. She lost the baby after he pushed her downstairs, miscarriage at 11 weeks. Sarah's hand flew protectively to her stomach. Emma pulled me aside with her laptop. "Barbara, I need to show you something." She opened an encrypted file showing an email from 4 months before the wedding. I recognized the address, A friend at securedmail.com, the one that went to my spam folder. Emma had recovered the full text. Dear Mrs. Mitchell, you don't know me, but your daughter is in terrible danger. The man she's engaged to comes from a family of predators. Please investigate him. Look for his past girlfriends. Jennifer Cole, Melissa Hartley. Save your daughter before it's too late. I'm sorry I can't do more. I'm sorry I couldn't save my own daughter from this family. A mother who understands. Emma looked at me with tears streaming down her face. Barbara, that email was from my mother. Diane Hartford has been trying to save Sarah from the very beginning. Emma pulled out a second USB drive. My mother has been secretly recording my father and Brandon for 2 years. She's been waiting for someone brave enough to use the evidence. The footage was devastating. Brandon at 14 torturing the family dog, while Richard laughed in the background. Boys being boys. Brandon at 16 threatening Emma while Richard coached "Make her fear you. That's how you control women." Audio of Richard and Marcus Levine discussing Catherine Brennan 20 years ago. She's dead. Just protect the family name. Then Diane's medical records spanning 35 years. Falls, accidents, black eye in 1992, broken arm in 1998, cracked ribs in 2011, decades of documented abuse. My father has been abusing my mother for 35 years, Emma said, voice shaking. Everything Brandon learned, he learned from watching our father. Rebecca examined the footage. This is powerful, but it was obtained without consent, illegal surveillance. Defense will move to suppress it. However, we can use it as a roadmap. We depose Richard under oath, ask specific questions based on what we know. When he lies, we bring witnesses to contradict him. I insisted on meeting Diane. Emma arranged it at her aunt's house where Diane was hiding. When she opened the door, I barely recognized the elegant woman from the wedding. She was 62, but looked 70 with a fresh bruise and trembling hands. She cried when she saw me. I loved Richard in the beginning. Then I feared him. Then I was trapped, she said. By the time I realized what he was, I had 2 small children, no money, no job skills. He controlled everything. He'd say, leave if you want, but you'll never see your children again. I believed him because men like Richard always win. You tried to warn me 4 months ago. I've watched Brandon destroy 3 women before Sarah. Each time I told myself it wasn't my fault. But Sarah reminded me of who I used to be before Richard broke me. I couldn't save myself. Maybe I could save her. Why now, after 35 years? Because I'm dying anyway. Ovarian cancer stage 3, diagnosed 6 months ago. Richard doesn't know. I have maybe 2 years left. I realized I could die complicit in their crimes or die having finally done something right. So I'm testifying against my husband, my son, the entire Hartford legacy. I'll have nothing after, but I'll have my voice back. Come stay with us after the trial, Texas. You'll be safe there. Thank you, I'd like that. Our full team gathered at the safe house. Emma officially revealed her identity. I'm an investigative journalist with ProPublica. 3 years building the largest domestic violence conspiracy case in history. The Collector Network. 47 members, 89 victims. Sarah's case is the keystone that brings them all down. Sarah looked at her. You used my suffering for a story? No. I gave you tools to survive and expose him while protecting yourself. We've been partners. Sarah nodded. Let's finish this. Rebecca began filing motions when bad news came. Judge Leonard Winters was assigned to Sarah's case. Emma immediately pulled up research showing a $75,000 wire transfer from Richard Hartford to Winters 3 days after Brandon's arrest. Agent Chen stood. We need him recused immediately. Rebecca filed an emergency motion. Within hours, Winters recused himself. The case went to Judge Maria Thompson, a former domestic violence prosecutor with a reputation for fairness. We breathed easier. An honest judge. Then Agent Chen's phone rang. He listened, face darkening. We intercepted communication from Richard Hartford's lawyer to someone called the architect. Message: the groom has failed. Implement Protocol 7 immediately. Emma went pale. Protocol 7 is elimination code. They're going to kill all of us before trial. Within an hour, FBI had us in armored vehicles heading to a new safe house. Sarah slept against my shoulder hand on her belly. My daughter had survived so much. Now she had to survive assassination protocols. How many times could she cheat death? My phone buzzed. No number. Protocol 7 has begun. Your daughter, your granddaughter. Emma Diane. Detective Morrison, Attorney Walsh, all marked for elimination. We always find our targets. We've been doing this for 30 years. You should have stayed in Texas, piano teacher. The collector. I showed Agent Chen. He read it and said grimly, "We're putting all of you in witness protection until trial, starting tonight." 8 weeks in witness protection felt like 8 years. But finally, the trial began at Massachusetts Superior Court under unprecedented security. Federal marshals screened every attendee, metal detectors at every entrance. Outside, hundreds of protesters held signs, some supporting Sarah, others defending the Hartford family. Media satellite trucks lined the street. Judge Maria Thompson, 55 and stern-faced, presided with absolute control. The jury, 7 women, 5 men from diverse backgrounds, sat stone-faced as opening statements began. Marcus Levine painted Sarah as a deeply disturbed woman with documented mental health issues who violently attacked her loving husband in a paranoid delusion fueled by her controlling mother's interference. Rebecca Walsh countered powerfully. Brandon Hartford murdered Thomas Mitchell to isolate Sarah. He abused her for 2 years. He slapped her in front of 200 witnesses. He held her hostage at gunpoint while she was pregnant with his child. Sarah defended herself against a man about to execute her. Sarah sat at the prosecution table 23 weeks pregnant in a conservative maternity dress hand protectively on her belly. I watched one male juror, Juror 7, make sympathetic eye contact with Brandon. That worried me. On day 3, Melissa Hartley took the stand. She'd flown from Canada to testify, visibly nervous but composed. She described meeting Brandon 4 years ago, the whirlwind romance turning to control and abuse. Then, the devastating moment, I told him I was pregnant, 9 weeks. I thought it might change things. Instead, he got angry, said I was trying to trap him. When I said I was leaving, he blocked the stairway. He pushed me. I fell down 14 stairs, broke my wrist, cracked 3 ribs, and I lost the baby that day. The courtroom went silent. Several jurors cried openly. Marcus Levine came to my hospital room with papers, an NDA. They gave me $100,000 to disappear and never speak about it. She looked directly at Brandon. You told me no one would believe me. But I'm here, still alive, still fighting. And you are the one who's destroyed. Even Judge Thompson wiped her eyes. On day 5, Sarah took the stand. The visual impact was impossible to ignore, a visibly pregnant woman testifying about abuse from the father of her child. She played audio recordings of Brandon's threats. She described the wedding, the hostage situation, firing in self-defense. But I noticed troubling signs. Sarah looked progressively paler. She kept drinking from her personal water bottle. Her hands trembled beyond normal nervousness. Day 6. Marcus Levine cross-examined brutally. You stayed voluntarily for 2 years. Why didn't you just leave? Sarah explained trauma bonding, fear, financial control. Or did you stay because you enjoyed the lifestyle? I stayed because I was afraid he'd kill me if I left. I was right. But Sarah was sweating despite the cool courtroom. Her hands shook. During recess, she told Rebecca, "I don't feel well. Probably just stress." Day 7. Sarah returned to the stand. As Levine hammered her with accusatory questions, I watched my daughter's face turn from pale to gray to green. She gripped the railing knuckles white. "Your Honor, I'm sorry, I just feel—" She collapsed. Chaos erupted. Someone screamed for a doctor. EMTs rushed in. As they loaded my unconscious daughter onto a stretcher, Judge Thompson called emergency recess. I heard one EMT say to another, "Check for toxicology. This presentation could be poisoning." Day 7 of testimony. Sarah back on stand for continued cross-examination. As Marcus Levine hammered her with questions designed to make her look calculated and manipulative. "Isn't it true you planned this whole scenario for attention?" I watched my daughter's face go from pale to gray to almost green. She gripped the witness stand railing so hard her knuckles turned white. "Your Honor, I'm sorry, I just feel—" And then she collapsed. Right there in the witness box, 6 months pregnant in front of the jury and judge and everyone. Chaos erupted. Someone screamed for a doctor. EMTs rushed in. And as they loaded my unconscious daughter onto a stretcher, as everyone panicked, and Judge Thompson called emergency recess, I heard one EMT say to another, "Check for toxicology. This presentation could be poisoning." My blood went ice cold. Someone had poisoned my pregnant daughter in a secured courthouse during her own trial. At the hospital, the doctor's words hit like a physical blow. "Your daughter has been poisoned. Arsenic administered in small doses over several days." At this concentration, another 24 to 48 hours would have been fatal to both her and the fetus. Sarah lay unconscious while doctors monitored the baby's heartbeat. I held her hand, praying harder than I'd ever prayed. The FBI investigation moved fast. Security footage showed a courthouse bailiff, 15-year employee, supposedly vetted, entering the witness waiting room each morning and accessing Sarah's personal water bottle. Under interrogation, the bailiff broke. "Someone paid me $20,000. They said it was just to make her sick enough to delay the trial. I didn't know it would kill her." The FBI traced him to Thomas Brennan, a courthouse attorney who turned out to be a collector member. His office revealed communications about Protocol 7 implementation. Worse, the sympathetic Juror 7 was also a planted collector associate. Judge Thompson faced a critical decision. Marcus Levine immediately moved for a mistrial, which would give the Hartfords more time to eliminate witnesses. Rebecca argued passionately, "Declaring mistrial rewards the collector. We've identified the bad actors. Sarah is willing to testify via video link. Let us finish this." Judge Thompson ruled firmly. Motion denied. This trial continues with enhanced security. Jury will be sequestered. Compromised juror removed. Ms. Mitchell testifies via secure video link. We will not allow criminals to obstruct justice. After a 2-week recess, Sarah, now 26 weeks pregnant, pale but determined, testified from her hospital bed via video screen. The visual impact was even more powerful. A fragile pregnant woman, still recovering from attempted murder, fighting for justice. Marcus Levine's aggressive cross-examination made him look like a bully attacking a sick, pregnant woman. It backfired completely. Then I took the stand, testifying about everything being uninvited from the wedding, discovering the abuse, posting the viral video learning Thomas was murdered. During Marcus Levine's cross-examination of me, a distinguished older man suddenly stood in the spectator gallery. "Objection! This entire proceeding is built on fraud." Judge Thompson looked startled. Sir, you can't. Your Honor, I'm Detective James Holland, retired Boston PD. I need to speak. This is relevant. Judge Thompson, given the extraordinary circumstances, allowed him to approach. Under oath, Detective Holland revealed everything. 20 years ago, I investigated Catherine Brennan's death. She died under suspicious circumstances after a Hartford family party. I was ordered to drop the investigation or lose my career. I kept the evidence. He pointed at Marcus Levine. And you were hired to make it disappear. You intimidated witnesses, paid off the medical examiner, destroyed evidence. I have documentation of a $500,000 payment from Richard Hartford to you. The courtroom exploded. Federal marshals arrested Marcus Levine on the spot. Brandon's defense team collapsed without their lead attorney. As federal marshals led Marcus Levine away in handcuffs, as the courtroom erupted in chaos, as everything seemed to finally be breaking in our favor. A court officer handed Judge Thompson an urgent medical document. The judge read it, her expression darkening. She called both legal teams to sidebar. Through the microphones, we could hear fragments. Terminal diagnosis, 4 to 6 months, medical evidence confirms. Judge Thompson returned to bench. Ladies and gentlemen, court has received medical records for defendant Brandon Hartford. Due to defendant's medical condition, trial will recess for 24 hours, while court determines if defendant is medically fit to continue proceedings. I grabbed Detective Morrison's arm. What does that mean? What medical condition? I didn't know, but I was about to find out that justice has cruel timing. Because Brandon Hartford wasn't just facing 25 years in prison, he was facing something even he couldn't buy his way out of. The next morning, Judge Thompson revealed the truth in chambers. Brandon Hartford had been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer 6 months before the wedding, shortly after Sarah conceived. He had 8 to 12 months to live. He was currently 8.5 months post-diagnosis. He had maybe 2 to 4 months left. He'd declined all treatment. He'd chosen to complete his Groom test for the collector before dying. Brandon's court-appointed public defender moved to delay the trial indefinitely. My client is dying. Forcing him through trial when he has only months to live is cruel. Rebecca opposed fiercely. Terminal illness doesn't excuse murder and abuse. Thomas Mitchell is dead. Sarah was tortured for 2 years. Those facts don't change because he's dying. Victims deserve justice now, not after he's conveniently dead. Judge Thompson ruled, trial continues. Mr. Hartford is mentally competent. His condition will be considered in sentencing, but won't delay justice. The news changed everything. Brandon's rushed timeline, his desperation, his violence, all driven by the knowledge he was dying. Sarah, watching via video with her hand on her belly, would give birth to a child whose father would likely already be dead. Closing arguments were powerful. Rebecca. Yes, he's dying, but cancer didn't make him a murderer. That was his choice. Justice is about truth, not sympathy. The jury deliberated 4 hours. When they returned, the courtroom was packed. The 4 persons stood. On count 1 assault and battery, we find the defendant guilty. Sarah cried on screen. I gripped Diane's hand. Count 2 kidnapping guilty. Count 3 attempted murder guilty. Count 4 conspiracy to cause the death of Thomas Mitchell guilty. The courtroom erupted. Judge Thompson sentenced him to 15 years, though everyone knew he would never serve it. Brandon spoke for the first time during the entire trial. This isn't over. There are others. You can't stop all of us. Judge Thompson replied coldly. Yes, Mr. Hartford, it is over. For you, at least. As the marshals led him away, Sarah mouthed at the screen, You lose. Within 48 hours, Richard Hartford was detained. Marcus Levine was formally charged. 15 more members of the collector were taken into custody across the country. That night, prison officials called. Brandon had been found in serious condition after trying to harm himself. He survived, but left behind a letter. Against everyone's advice, Sarah and I read it. He confessed everything, the diagnosis, the truth about Thomas's death and his motives. "You didn't win," he wrote. "The illness did. You're just here for the final act. In 4 months, I'll be gone anyway. My time is almost over. Can you say the same?" Sarah stared at the letter. "He was dying all along." "The justice," I said, "is that he dies knowing the world saw what he was. No sympathy, no dignity, just truth." 3 weeks later, Agent Chen called. "Brandon Hartford died last night, cancer. He's already been cremated. No funeral, he's just gone." I looked at Sarah now, 28 weeks pregnant. "He's dead." Her hand went to her belly. "So my baby will never meet their biological father." No emotion, just fact. 3 weeks after the verdict. 3 weeks after reading Brandon's confession that he was dying anyway. I was helping Sarah pack up her hospital room, finally released after recovery from poisoning, when FBI agent Chen called. "Barbara, Brandon Hartford died last night. Pancreatic cancer, final stages, went quickly. His body has already been cremated per his instructions. No funeral, no service, no public announcement. He's just gone." I hung up and looked at Sarah now, 28 weeks pregnant, packing tiny baby clothes we'd been collecting. "He's dead," I said quietly. Sarah's hand went to her belly. "So my baby will never meet their biological father." She said it without emotion, not glad, not sad, just factual. Is that better or worse? I didn't have an answer. What I did know was this: in 12 weeks, Sarah would give birth to Brandon Hartford's child. And we would love that baby, fiercely raise them right. Break every cycle of abuse that family represented. That was the real victory, not Brandon's death, but the life we'd build from the ashes. 4 months later, I held my grandson for the first time in a Texas hospital delivery room. Sarah named him Thomas Hartford Mitchell, honoring the grandfather who died protecting us, acknowledging the biological father's DNA without hiding it, but claiming the Mitchell family name as what prevails. "He has your eyes," I whispered to Sarah, "and Thomas's smile. I don't see Brandon in him at all. Even if he looks like Brandon someday, he'll never be Brandon," Sarah said, exhausted but peaceful. "We're breaking that cycle right here." Diane Hartford stood beside us, tears streaming. "I couldn't save my own children from that family's poison, but I get to help raise this one right. I get a second chance." Emma was there too, camera ready. "This is the real ending. Not violence, not revenge, just life continuing, love winning." Her ProPublica expose had been published 2 weeks earlier, 50,000 words documenting the collector network. It won a journalism award. Congress held hearings. 67 more victims came forward. 6 months after Thomas's birth, we opened the Second Chance Foundation in my expanded Texas home. Sarah taught women to recognize abuse patterns. I ran the uninvitedmothers.org, supporting mothers whose daughters were being isolated. Emma investigated dangerous situations. Diane consulted on how wealthy families cover up abuse. Rebecca provided legal services. Our first major success was Rachel Montgomery, 26, who called after seeing Sarah's story. "My fiancé just uninvited my mother from our wedding. I'm terrified." We investigated. Her fiancé was connected to the collector. We helped Rachel escape, gather evidence, testify. He was arrested, leading to 3 more arrests. In our first year, we helped over 200 women. I hosted a national conference for uninvited mothers. 300 attended. "How many of you were uninvited to your child's wedding?" I asked. Hundreds of hands rose. "How many regret staying away?" Nearly all hands, many crying. The uninvite is a weapon. It's an isolation tactic. When your daughter suddenly says you're not welcome in her life, especially if it's his idea, that's your warning. Show up. Not necessarily to the wedding if it's dangerous, but show up in her life. Call, text, email. Be the annoying, persistent mother. She may hate you for it, but she'll be alive to hate you. Standing ovation. Mothers lined up to share stories, devastating and hopeful. 1 year after the viral video, we gathered for dinner. Sarah, me, Emma, Diane, Detective Morrison, Rebecca, and 6-month-old Thomas. "Thank you for not giving up on me," Sarah said. "Giving up was never an option." The phone rang. Rachel Montgomery. "My friend needs help. Her boyfriend is isolating her." Sarah and I exchanged looks. "Send us the details." The work continues. The mission continues. I wasn't invited to my daughter's wedding, but I showed up to her life. And that was the only invitation that ever mattered. To every mother reading this, trust your instincts. Be the mother who shows up, who speaks up, who refuses to stay silent. Your daughter may not thank you now, but she'll be alive to not thank you. Survival is possible. Healing is possible. Justice is possible. But only if we refuse to stay silent. If Sarah's story moved you, if Barbara's courage inspired you, or if you know someone who needs to hear this message, please don't keep it to yourself. Share this video. It might save a life. It might reach a mother who's been uninvited from her daughter's wedding and doesn't know what to do. It might reach a daughter who's being isolated and needs to know she's not alone. Your share could be the lifeline someone desperately needs right now. I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever experienced isolation from a partner? Have you been the mother who refused to stay silent? Maybe you're the friend who noticed the warning signs. Share your story below because your words might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. Every comment, every shared experience creates a community of support for women who feel alone in their struggles. And if you believe in this mission, if you think stories like Sarah's deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This channel is dedicated to sharing true stories of survival justice and the power of refusing to stay silent. We're building a community of people who understand that love sometimes means being inconvenient, being persistent, being the person who shows up even when you're told to stay away. Remember Barbara's final words, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't let politeness silence you. Don't let anyone make you feel like you're overreacting. Be the mother, the friend, the sister who refuses to let someone disappear into someone else's nightmare. Because survival is possible. Healing is possible. Justice is possible. But only if we refuse to stay silent. Thank you for watching, for caring, and for being part of this community. Together, we're creating a world where abusers can't operate in shadow and silence. See you in the next story.